Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good day, wherever you are in the world today. Thank you for joining us one more time to talk about the traditions. My name is Herb. I'm an alcoholic. And you all know that. This is my website address in the event that you need to access the resources, especially on the traditions. It's pretty straightforward, herbk.com. And join me in the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Thank you. Welcome to the final discussion about the traditions today. And next month, we will start the discussion, a similar format of the concepts. We'll have an orientation to the concepts that first meeting in July, and then a discussion specifically on 3 of the concepts, each gathering, each month for 4 months. And then we'll have in December a discussion like this, a wrap up of and an overview of and an experience with each of the concepts. So we are going to talk about traditions. It's interesting, and it could be my selective attention, meaning because I'm thinking about principles, I'm beginning to see principles everywhere I look. It's kind of like if you're thinking of buying a white Ford, you will in fact see white Fords all over the place more than you've ever seen them before. In psychology, they call that selective attention. What's on our mind is what we see. But it's wonderful to have as our perspective the word principle. Of course, Bill used it as a synonym for the steps. Practice these principles in all our affairs. That's what he was talking about. Each step has its own principles. And then when he had the insight that this group of people needed some principles to guide them, not rules, not regulations. He was very clear. He said there are only 2 disciplines in Alcoholics Anonymous. One is alcohol, one is God. Oh my God. No pun intended. That is so simple and yet laser focused. There's only 2 principles. One is the spirit. One is the spirits. That was Carl Jung's play on words. We're either going for one or we're going for the other. It's pretty rigorous. It's pretty black and white. That's why I like that dimmer switch model or analogy. The dimmer switch on a greased axle is going up or it's going down. The lights are getting brighter or the lights are getting dimmer. There's no resting spot. The dimmer switch is either going up or it's going down. It doesn't rest. It doesn't stop. Bill uses the term not to rest on our laurels. Many people misinterpret that. Laurels is not our butt. It's a historical term. Laurels were the wreaths of accomplishment to signify success and championship, perfection almost in the Greek culture. Whether that was running a marathon or doing a play or writing a poem or making a statue, You got a wreath because the community recognized you as close to the gods as humanly possible. And you were able to wear that wreath in the community and have all of the benefits of that kind of acknowledgement. But you couldn't rest on the laurels, meaning yesterday's medals, yesterday's work, yesterday's accomplishments. And that's why Bill says in the steps so profoundly, simply, and yet probably the best kept secret in the rooms. We have a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. Well, he put together the traditions, of course, for unity. As the steps were to provide deflation of the individual ego, Bill clearly says, and it's, I believe, in the 12 and 12. The traditions were put together to deflate the ego of the group. So there's a very nice parallel. In fact, it gives you some wonderful insight into each of the traditions when you parallel them with each of the steps. I don't know whether it was meant to reflect that or not, but it certainly helped me get underneath the letter of the law of the traditions to get to the spirit. What was Bill's intention? And when I connect it to the spirit of the purpose of the bullseye part of the steps, it opens up that tradition to me. Guidelines and guardrails. Both the positive and the negative. Guidelines and guardrails. Those are my words for the traditions. Well, we've looked at 3 traditions a session each month beginning February. We had our orientation in January. And so I'm not going to do any or much teaching today concerning each of the traditions, but I do want to invite commentary on your knowledge of and or your experience with or your examples of the practice of these principles, or actually the lack of practice and the reason for these principles, these traditions. Both the letter and the spirit. You know that there's a recording, a podcast on the YouTube from a workshop that I did several years ago, a 2-hour workshop on each of the traditions. I think it was 2014, and they've been edited and they're posted, downloadable from YouTube for free. Most of my resources on either my web or on YouTube are all downloadable for free. The only, I think, area where there might be where there is some money involved is with my books, and that's because of the publishers, etc. The primary resource for the traditions is the 12 and 12. If you read that, you'll have a good basic understanding of each of the traditions. I like to read the 12 and 12 at least once a year, both the steps when I'm doing the step work in the workshops, and the traditions just once a month. I read the corresponding month just for my own meditation. The booklet, the 12 Traditions Illustrated, is, although it's a cartoon, it really appeals to me because of its simplicity and its laser focused. We're going to take it one tradition at a time, and I thought what I'd do is actually use the 12 and 12 as a basis. In the table of contents, they have the short form and a small paragraph, 5 lines, maybe 6 lines, and I thought I'd use that as the prompter going forward. But let's pray this prayer for an open mind and open heart. Yes, you've read some stuff, and yes, you've had some discussions, and yes, you may be quite skilled and knowledgeable about the traditions, more so than myself. Mine's mostly from reading and discussions like this. I've never really been involved in the internal organization of or service structure of AA. I've had a traditions guide that took me through the traditions in the same way I've had many step guides who've taken me through the steps. If in fact you're inclined to hear that and engage that as a process for yourself, I highly recommend it. Either an individual who's particularly skilled with and knows both the letter and the spirit of the traditions, engage them to guide you through each of the traditions, both the study of and the application of, and or form a small group. That's come out of my weekly workshops on the steps, that small groups were formed spontaneously in between the weekly workshops, and those were very powerful. But right now, take a breath and be willing to have an open mind and an open heart. Maybe today you'll learn something. Maybe today you'll experience something that you didn't learn and you didn't experience up to this point. But that can only be if, in fact, your mind is open and your heart is open. That's the whole point of the set-aside attitude as expressed in the set-aside prayer. Please join me. God, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, my guiding principles, the 12 traditions, and you, for an open mind and a new experience with myself, my guiding principles, the 12 traditions, and especially you. As I mentioned in my opening comments, the traditions were addressing the problem of group function. The meeting and the group itself, but also the relationship of meetings and groups amongst themselves and between themselves. I've encouraged you, and this is the tact that we've taken in this workshop, is to take the traditions itself that had the original function of application to group and apply it to our personal life. I've come across, although I haven't read and or used a manual, I think that's what it would be called. It's a workbook. It looks quite comprehensive, and I've heard Mary Pearl speak many times, both on recording and personally. She's quite an accomplished Al-Anon, and she wrote this book, Healthy Relationships, a Workbook, copyrighted 1999, Mary Pearl T. And it's in its 10th printing, at least that's the one I have. And I'm very confident that it would be helpful, just because I'm very impressed with Mary Pearl and her experience with both her Al-Anon program, but also the application of the traditions to the personal life, especially in relationships. And she's talking about the family relationships primarily. Bill saw this as legacies. That's the term that's used later on in some of the AA literature, that the steps were the first legacy as encoded in the big book, the textbook of Alcoholics Anonymous. But very soon, and we've talked about it, he saw that if he didn't create some type of guidelines for the group, that the group itself would have problems and deteriorate over time after he and Dr. Bob were no longer alive. Dr. Bob died, I believe, in 1950, maybe 1950, yeah, 51, we're someplace in there. And so they knew the mortality they needed to have in writing so that the institution itself would survive the co-founder's passing. And it was ratified in the very first international conference, 1950. I believe it was in Cleveland. And then later on, 5 years later on, Bill had the brilliant insight to write the concepts, the 12 concepts for service, really how to run a nonprofit, spiritually motivated organization. And those 12 concepts were ratified in 1955. There's a service manual that is on the website. I'll be doing a monthly workshop, as I mentioned, on the concepts in the same format that we've done for the traditions. And so if you're interested in that, then go to my website and download the resources and tools there. They're very parallel to the traditions with worksheets and some support material that will help unpack it, but there's nothing like reading the service manual. Yeah, it's dry, but again, use the set-aside attitude in prayer and understand, or at least attempt to understand, what the purpose of and the application is. And you'll see more than any other, quite frankly, I was so more impressed with the concepts than I was with the steps and the traditions, only because of the brilliance of the insight that he had. As Melissa mentioned, I come from a corporate business background, a consultant in human resources, and maybe that makes me more sensitive to the application of the concepts as human resources principles. Brilliant. I mean, Bill's literal brilliance is exhibited in the development of those concepts. So step 12 says, practice these principles. And we say it glibly, we don't pay much attention to it. Some of us really understand what it means. Most of the people actually really don't. I didn't. Not until I had done the steps, and then I realized I had principles. Oh my God, I had principles. You could have fooled anybody around me because I didn't operate on them. I was not conscious of them, but I had them. And I also discovered in the 12-step process that there were principles that I didn't have that I would want to have if I were to be a decent human being. That was the breaking of the code for the 12-step process, that awakening that allowed me to see, number one, I had principles that I didn't practice, and I didn't have some principles that I needed to have, both so that I could be a decent human being as the fantasy and the delusion that I thought I was. Well, the Step 12 says we practice this in our personal life, of course, and now we're going to take the traditions themselves and practice those in our personal life. That wasn't the original intent. The original intent of the 12 traditions was the application to the group itself, the meetings that you go to within your group. Perhaps your group has only one meeting that it sponsors, or perhaps there's several meetings that your group sponsors. There's a difference between the group and the meeting, as I think you know from our discussions. But the biggest application was broader than that, is how to keep the groups themselves in Los Angeles in coordination with and in alignment with, alignment's a great word, the groups in Northern California or Ohio or New York or Singapore or Israel. Oh my goodness, all these different countries, these different cultures. That's the whole application of the 12 steps in the broadest and the original purpose. But then people like Mary Pearl took them and said, well, how about to our personal lives? Because at the very least, my significant relationship is a small group. My family, if I have one, is a small group. My workplace is a small group. my community, my church, my neighborhood, small groups. And we can apply these principles in every one of those. We've used this approach for the steps. I've suggested that you use this approach for the traditions. What did I read and hear? I'll read the short form. What does it mean? That will be the discussion that we'll have. I'm suggesting that we do 6 of the traditions in the first half of our time together and 6 of the traditions in the second half of our time together. The scheduled time is from 10 to 12 or 1 o'clock. As you know, because of Zoom, we can be quite flexible. Obviously, you can leave anytime you want. And I will stay here as long as, in fact, we're engaged in having a meaningful discussion. I don't have a time limit. What does it mean, each of these traditions? So we'll spend 10 minutes. I want you to raise your hand to talk about your understanding of the tradition and your experience with it and examples with it, if in fact you have some experience and examples, or any of the questions that you might have in crosstalk is totally please. Amongst yourselves, treat it like we're in the room together, because we're in the Zoom room. Especially, how does it apply specifically and practically, not theoretically? Please, let's not speculate and use theory, what ifs. I try to keep people very grounded, walking on the path. How are your feet moving? What is your actual experience? And what is the principle? There's no list of principles that I'm aware of that's official, but there's lots of lists of principles that people have come up with, because Bill says in the steps, practice these principles. I have a list in my way of life document on the website. I've changed it periodically as I have more insight, or at least I think I do, and more application. That might have been a longer introduction than I had anticipated, but there you have it. I'm going to read the first short form of the tradition. And then just the paragraph. I think it's relevant. It'll sort of prime the pump. You're welcome to raise your hand. If you want to share a question and or a comment, I may be able to answer the question. But if I'm not, I'll say so, and somebody else is welcome to answer the question, or at least address it from their reaction to the question and or experience. So, tradition 1. Our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon AA unity. My sense is, have in your mind this cosmic body, the universe, this cosmic body, like very much my body or your body. I mean, we have a head and we have arms and we have legs and we have eyes and we have ears. Each has a function, all integrated. The whole point of emotional sobriety is to come to a place of integration, where I have recovery from my addiction, and then I have recovery from the dysfunctional emotions that have come from my addiction and other people's and or our culture, so that we can in fact function in the way I believe we were meant to function, as decent human beings fitting into a community that is together because it promotes the safety and the survival of the individual through the participation in the community. To the extent that all my cells are working together, I'm healthy. When some of my cells are not working together, I go to the appropriate professional. Without unity, AA dies. Individual liberty, yet great unity. Individual liberty, yet great unity. That's the balance that Melody Beattie, I'm going to do some spontaneous stuff. Of course, I can't help myself. Melody Beattie talks about in her Codependent No More. The key to codependence is independence and interdependence, and that connection of both in balance. Key to paradox. Each AA's life depends on obedience to spiritual principles. Obedience actually has a lighter touch if you understand where it comes from in the Latin obedere, to listen. It's cool. Obedere, to listen to the tiny whispering sound, to listen to the group conscience. The group must survive or the individual will not. So the group has a slight edge over the individual is the implication. Common welfare comes first. How best to live and work together as groups. You're welcome to raise your hands if you have comments, questions, if you want to identify the principles. That worksheet that I put together, I'm watching to see if there are hands, indicates that the purpose of this tradition is to address the group weakness of the ego, selfishness and individuality. That this principle is, in fact, for the deflation of the ego at the group, to keep in mind that, yes, I'm important. I am the center of my universe. I'm just not the center of the universe, which requires the action and the principle of respect, partnership, that we're a living organism, each one of us respecting the other. The eye is not more important than the ear. The arm is not more important than the foot. Each is important because it has a distinct function. Each of us is important because we have a uniqueness of a contribution. A uniqueness as unique as our fingerprint, as unique as our DNA. It's a wonderful insight to have. Yes, I'm really unique. I'm not special. That was my narcissism. I'm not special, but I am unique, one of a kind. And as a result, I have some gifts. And if I can connect to my gifts, it'll benefit the community.
Hi, Herb. Good morning, everyone. Hi. Yeah, I really appreciate the sheet you gave us when we started this, with it had the different principles with the traditions that you know, and in tradition 1, you said, what is the principle of humility? Define both the principle of humility from both principle and humility from a commercial dictionary. And here in this dictionary, it says, you know, it's the state or quality of being humble. So I go up to humble and it says having or showing a consciousness of one's shortcomings. And I think that kind of, for me as an Al-Anon, really is just so important in the family setting, you know. It's really freeing, not only in a group from the kind of control aspect that seeps in everywhere I go, but from the fact that when I have that humility, it's not just unity with my group, with my family. It's like the humility of the immenseness of life itself. Like there's just so little I really control.
There's nothing that you control.
Thank you. Thank you. I do struggle controlling how the lens that, you know, I want to even control grace. That's where I am like, and it's a tender morning for me. So I come back to that principle, and it reminds me of this tiny speck of sand and this tiny, like just the teeny tininess of me. And it kind of helps me unclench. And then it reminds me of that, the spiritual solution. and the getting on my knees. So that's where I was going back to in the morning, the getting on my knees to get my attention, to be humble, to be, you said, close to the ground. I think you can say that better of humus. Humus, I believe, is Latin for close to the ground, or is that correct?
It actually means humus is actually translated as earth or dirt. So your model that you used was a grain of sand. A grain of sand is unique, but when you put it on the beach of 20 trillion grains of sand, it's not so unique. That's right. And that, yeah.
But it also helps me get kind of quiet and listen in a group more. The importance of listening.
That's really the key there. Yeah.
And also this thinking that I have this burden of like fixing. I mean, can't even walk out my apartment with this like huge rock on me if I'm thinking I have this burden of fixing. So just taking small steps. And so I really love the principle of humility, because it doesn't feel like this you're doing it wrong, get humble. It's really freeing. It's like you're human.
It's really freeing. And I think that's really the focus of the positive aspect of it, because it gets a bad rap.
Yeah.
And one of the philosophers said, humility is truth.
Yeah.
The recognition of the truth. And the truth is that I'm not dog meat. Really, I'm not dirt. That's why I'm careful with the definition of humus. I'm not dirt with the implication of negativity. I'm sand with the implication of one of many.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So thank you. I just wanted to say that I love this tradition, because it feels like I feel the care in this tradition. I feel like I'm cared for some reason. I can't explain it.
If we have the perspective, yes, wonderful. And it really is about attitude. If we have the perspective that there is I read a phrase this morning that I just loved, that there's a cosmic connection of every material reality in this universe.
Yes.
That we're all, and that's why I use the image of my body as the model each one of us has, but we're all connected in some way with this life force. All right. So you hear a lot about spiritual principles. You hear a lot about perhaps human principles or universal principles. And this author talked about cosmic principles. Just blew it up for me that this is a cosmic organism that we're connected to. We're not necessarily aware of it until we elevate our consciousness to that.
Yes, that's exactly what I was trying to say. Thank you. Yeah. And then also the other thing is, as soon as I hear about remember humility, space opens in my body.
Yeah.
It's a physical reality of change when I can remember to be humble, and stop gripping. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. And just because you emphasized it, I'm going to just recommend chapter 7 from the 12 and 12 on the step 7. That entire chapter is on humility. And then the step begins with humbly ask God to, and the implication is that I'm powerless over my character defects and I need help. Humbly ask, and that whole chapter is a treatise, a wonderfully simple explanation of or comment on what it means, humility, from a positive standpoint, like you were talking about. Thanks, Ashley. Roger.
Good morning. This principle of common welfare, it seems to me that it's a natural manifestation of what I try to achieve and what we find in meditation, that I see myself and all in me.
Yeah.
And so that's the unity consciousness that you were talking about from the cosmic perspective.
Yes.
I'm not separate. So if I'm doing my meditation and things are working okay for me and I do it long enough, I don't see how I can see other than this.
I'm confident that's the comments that I've made have all come out of that, my meditation practice, that improved consciousness. In fact, I like alliteration, and it helps me a little bit on some insights, but I like the term for the 11th step, consciousness, and for the 12th step, compassion. And they're integrally tied together like two sides of the same coin. Because that's what you see when you're conscious. You see the connection, right?
For sure.
Yeah. Thanks. Well, and that's, from my standpoint, my hope for our time together today is that we have some short little bursts of comments and or sharing and or questions and or experience. Going to tradition 2. For our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God, as God may express God's self in our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants, they do not govern. Now, you can see the implication and the connection to step 2 there, as I mentioned in my opening comments. Where does AA get its direction? Obedere, to listen. Sole authority in AA is loving God as God expresses God's self in the group conscience. Formation of a group, growing pains, rotating committee are servants of the group. Leaders do not govern, they serve. Does AA have a real leadership? Elder statesmen and bleeding deacons, the group conscience speaks. I'm just reading the summary comments that sort of primes the pump for perhaps some questions or discussions on tradition 2. The notes that I have in my little matrix. Self-reliance is the individual weakness within the group, of course, as Bill says in the fear inventory. That's the secret that unlocks the door for fear, self-reliance versus God reliance or power reliance or principle reliance. Whatever your word is in step 2 and 3 for God as we don't understand it. Again, humility based on God reliance or the power of the universe or the tiny whispering sound or the life force or the cosmic force or the source or nature. Trust, the antidote to fear. And you hear all the time the word group conscience. I heard somebody share the other day, wouldn't it be nice if it really said the informed group conscience? Oh, have you ever been in a meeting that's discussing some type of reconciliation or recommendation for action? In my first year, I became a CSO, Central Service Office. And I went to these meetings. Well, I had to, after a year, it was a 2-year commitment. I had to leave it. I could not, my personality can't deal with that level of discussion. I'll be kind. Informed group conscience. I believe it's in tradition 2 that Bill used a phrase that I've now adopted as my lens through which I look, evaluating my activity. The good may be the enemy of the best. Now, it's a cute saying, but it's profound, and it changed my life. The good may be the enemy of the best. Each one of us is good at many things. Each one of us, however, has a best one or two things. Like the fingerprint, the DNA that I referred to earlier, we have a unique competency. Unique to us because of our background, education, genetics, training, whatever it is, there's something, one or two things that are outstanding to the extent that we spread our energies in lots of good things. We don't have the energy for the most important things. So I numbered the activities that I had. This was when I retired back in 15, 16 years ago. And I numbered them. One being what I considered at the time the most important, which was the step work. And then other things. I was on boards and just a variety of activities, all of them good things, a scale of 1 to 5. 5 being the least important in the scale of 1 to 5 as I ranked it. So totally my relative perception of reality. And I made a decision to eliminate everything that wasn't a number 1. It took me 3 months to disengage responsibly. Well, that was so effective and so freeing that I have used that principle. Every year I do an audit. Now it's an audit of the number 1s. So I'm refining the number 1s. And of course, well, maybe not, of course, it might not be your way you would evaluate, but as Roger was saying about meditation, for me, that's the most important aspect of my daily activity is meditation. Prayer, sure, certain, but meditation. And I spend some formal time in the morning and some formal time in the evening and sometime during the day if I'm so inclined to improve that consciousness. That's the whole, for me, the center post of human nature is to be as conscious as possible. Bill knew it when he wrote the step to improve our consciousness. Well, he said to improve our conscious contact. I have interpreted that as to improve my consciousness. And it's infinite because I'm in contact with infinity. There's no limit to what I can contact. There's a limit to me, of course, and the expansion of my consciousness. But that's my focus, to become as conscious as possible. And of course, conscious of principles because they guide me.
One thing that I just noticed that twigged my attention in the tradition too is that our leaders are trusted servants. The word trust is what got my attention.
Yes, yes.
Not really sure too much what else to say about it, except that that's one of the things that I'm struggling with.
Well, and you've heard me say it. I asked my wife, when will you trust me again? And she looked me straight in the eyes. She said, her trust is earned. It's never given. And I said, how do I earn your trust again? She said, with consistent behavior. So you're spotlighting that word is wonderful. Have they actually earned your trust? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and then part of why it got my attention too is because of this whole notion of practicing these principles in all our affairs.
Yeah.
And so it's like I'm looking and seeing how is this relevant in the rest of my life and like at work, and trying to find the balance in how I conduct myself and how I interact at work with what's just my baggage that I need to take care of separately, and what's larger issues with the workplace that I need to stand up for myself with, or figure out when to step back and just let things unfold. Where's the it's like how do I practice the serenity prayer on that? Which are the elements that I need to do something about being responsible for myself, and where do I just need to step back and get out of other people's way and recognize when this is not a me problem, but it's somebody else's problem, and I just need to stay out of the way.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
But
and that's a practice, and you'll get it right sometimes, and you'll make a mistake sometimes, and you'll learn from making mistakes and course correction. But that's correct, and that's trusting yourself.
yeah. And then like if something I guess it's almost like even learning how to accept the possibility of trust and recognize that nobody else is any more perfect than I am. So if something happens that makes me feel like I'm not being trusted, but maybe it's just someone else being imperfect and not, they're jumping to assumptions, and
Well, that's where you trust yourself to address the situation if it's worthy of your and their time to address it.
right.
Right.
It's like, how do I handle it so I'm not borrowing extra trouble?
Well, exactly. Because I think you're, again, being conscious of that you have some deficiencies that are pressing your button, but they're not deficiencies of the other person. They're your oversensitivity and or whatever else the interpretation would be, which is really your problem. And what I say to people all the time, and you've heard me say it, don't make your problems my problems.
Right. And that's part of it. That's my problem. And then there's the other part. If someone did overstep,
That's right.
then, if I'm not the only one who overstepped, somebody else overstepped, then how far what do I need to do or not do about that without tripping over myself?
Yeah, and when we talk about meditation or consciousness, that's called discernment. It's a fancy word, but what it really means is that in prayer, I'm thinking. The serenity prayer, the set-aside prayer, and then in the milieu of that, trusting that there is something that's going to whisper to me, I'm going to listen to the various sort of sounds that are being made in response to my question. And then I'll either respond and take a risk, or maybe I'm inclined not to respond and take a risk.
Sounds like the reminder there that, like everything else, the discernment is a practice to develop and practice and do the experiments. So attempt some discernment, take the action or not, and see if it worked or if I made a mistake and need to go back to the drawing board and try again.
And you've heard me say it, life is a practice. Yeah. Right. All right. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks.
Roger, please.
Hi, Herb. I don't find myself very often disagreeing with something that you said, but I have an issue with this concept of informed consciousness.
Yeah. And conscience.
On conscience, yeah. Because I feel that what this tradition says is that the ultimate authority is God is expressed through group consciousness, not informed.
Yeah.
And
okay. All right. I hear that.
Mm-hmm. I know personally, I like to think that I'm right and I know better. But I don't think really with this tradition that I should be judging whether somebody else is right or wrong.
Oh, for sure.
And I've learned basically, and it applies, we talk about situations other than in AA groups and things like that, with my own kids and things like that. I'm responsible really for saying my truth and expressing it.
Right.
And listening without comment to the other people and their truth.
Yeah. Right.
And if I really disagree, what I've learned to say is just, you may be right. And it really diffuses any potential problems.
Right.
And I really try to avoid judging whether somebody else is right or wrong. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, and I think it's a wonderful caution. At the same time, there's a lot of ignorance, meaning not knowing, and there's a lot of emotional reaction that is uninformed. So that's really where I was coming from in terms of the emphasis on informed, is to be the counterbalance to both being uninformed and or being emotionally driven to express opinions. So, but 100% that it's not about judging other people, although that's part of our role, judging in the positive sense as an evaluation. I have several people that I have a fundamental disagreement with their evaluation of social appropriateness. It's not my job to correct them, but it is my job to understand what my position is. I have a particular philosophy about human nature and how it works in society, and other people have perhaps a little bit different take on it. Yeah, you see what I mean there?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, but eventually, what you're saying is, and that's the emphasis here. I think what you're saying is wonderful, and that is that we trust the discussion as a group conscience. And that's not a group discussion in 30 minutes and we take a vote. Group conscience literally is a process of vetting other people's perceptions and their opinions and their emotions and their information, and allowing the group to process all of this, especially the minority opinion, I think is the word they use, and coming to not really a consensus in the sense of unanimous, but pretty much getting a sense of the direction of it. I'm not quite sure how that all works. Yes?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah. Bob, please. Good.
I had somebody say, I never would have thought to get a dictionary from the 1930s when I'm reading the big book. And I said, I didn't think about it either. I stole the idea from Herb K.
Yeah.
But after that, I decided I should look up agnostic in this 1938 Collier's Century Dictionary. It's 3 volumes, no doubt sold door to door, right? By an encyclopedia salesman who probably went, rats, all they bought was the dictionary. This is kind of interesting. So, with your kind permission, agnostic, from the Greek, unknown or unknowable.
Mm-hmm.
One who holds that the ultimate cause, God, and the essential nature of things are unknown or unknowable, or that human knowledge is limited to experience. And I thought, I'm still an agnostic. I still fit this because I had an experience. It took an experience to convince me that there's spiritual nature to life and the universe and everything. So I just thought that was interesting that I still fit that definition.
Well, and it's a big challenge for us in terms of step 2, as you've heard me share, that at 10 years of sobriety, going through the work the 3rd time, that's what the man asked me. He says, what do you believe? And I wrote out a wonderful treatise. And then he asked me after I read that, well, how do you behave in light of that? And it was curtain rending, because I didn't behave that way. And I discovered that I was an agnostic, like your definition is. Yeah. And
it's like
it allowed me, though, to understand what step 2 was: a faith decision, not based on knowledge or certitude, but just based on a simple decision, a choice. And it so empowered my step 11 practice after that. It was wonderful to have the experience that I was actually a practical agnostic, not theoretical, but a practical one. And that I wanted my feet to match my head. And so I needed to move my feet differently. Yeah, right. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
You bet. Tradition 3, the only requirement for AA membership is the desire to stop drinking. Early tolerance based on fear. To take away any alcoholic's chance at AA was sometimes to pronounce his death sentence. Membership regulations abandoned. As you know, there was a collection of 62 rules and regulations, or 61, I guess it was. And then somebody said, and the 62nd was don't take yourself so seriously. 2 examples of experience. Any alcoholic is a member of AA, any of a 12-step fellowship. I'm going to broaden it because the scope of our conversation is any 12-step fellowship. You're a member when you say so. So it's about inclusivity. I mentioned that spirit of welcome. That's an attitude that just recently, because of these conversations, I want to help. Those are the lenses through which I want to look when I'm going into a meeting or when I'm talking to somebody, is a heart space, a heart space. It's hard for me. I don't go there easily or readily. A heart space of welcome. Acceptance and tolerance. Of course, that was Dr. Bob's final address. I believe it was 1950. Before he died, he said, love and tolerance. Love and tolerance. Keep it really simple. Love and tolerance.
Am I there? Takes my camera a minute.
You're definitely there.
I mean, when I think of this tradition, Herb, I juxtapose it with step 12, right? So it's not only, you're right, it's a heart space, it's compassion, it's love, it's the hatred I have for this disease, right?
Oh,
I don't hate any human being, but boy, do I hate this disease.
yeah.
But from step 12, the compassion step, as you call it very wisely, we know that without these people who come in the doors, we can't stay sober, right? But we have to carry the message to the still, I'm going to call it the still struggling addict or alcoholic or whatever it is, the 12-step diseases. And so it's not just that we don't want to keep them out because of inclusion and love. There's no question that's a wonderful motivation. We need them to come in so that we can stay sober, so we can stay alive, right?
Yeah.
I like the way Bill put it in tradition 2. This is a matter of life and death.
Yes. Yes.
When I say that, I don't mean that we welcome them in love. Sure, that's a wonderful thing to be, but you cannot be there, right? I know a lot of people that don't like the addicts that stumble into AA, NA meetings. That's their problem, and hopefully they'll grow through the steps, right, as they progress. They'll have a spiritual awakening and then a spiritual experience and a spiritual awakening if they work the steps. Is probably not osmosis from the meetings, but I think there's I'm going to call it a self-interested motivation, and it's a proper self-interest. You could call it selfish, but
no,
I'm going to call it
healthy self-interest. I think that's a wonderful term. Yeah.
And sometimes we call it good selfish. This is good selfish. So the good selfish is, I need these people stumbling into these meetings. Now I'm talking about substance 12 steps. I need these people stumbling in the meeting so what I can stay alive.
Yeah.
Well, I used to ask people, newcomers, especially NA, where they really might die. I used to ask these folks, come to lunch with me, come to dinner, let's go talk. And about half, 3/4 of the time, they're not going to.
Sure.
But then I started asking in a different way, Herb. I started asking, will you come with me to lunch or dinner so you can keep me alive? And they'll look at me kind of stupid. What do you mean? I said, well, in step 12, I've got to spread the message or I might go use again and I'm going to die.
Yeah.
So I, as we look at all these traditions and all the steps, I always like the emphasis on this is life and death.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is life and death. There's no ambiguity. And it could be a spiritual death, right? That's bad enough, right?
Yeah. Right. Right. Well, and you're reminding me of a wonderful anecdote. about Bill at 6 months of sobriety. He was telling Lois he was about to go to Akron. He hadn't met Bob yet. He was in New York and he was about to go to Akron. And he said to Lois, I have tried. I really interpreted my experience that I needed to carry this message of spiritual awakening to people. Because I was given that gift and I needed to carry it, but nobody's heard it. Nobody's heard it. I have not gotten one person sober. I'm going to quit. I'm going to come back from Akron. I'm going to go back to Wall Street so that you don't have to work in the dime store anymore. Because in fact, my message is not being heard. It's not working. And nobody's getting sober. And Lois looked at him. She paused, just like you just said. She said, "You're sober." And Bill got it. He was startled. Oh, it's not about me getting them sober. It's about me staying sober. And whether people come into a meeting or not, I'll take it a step further. It's about our proactivity. Bill reached out from that Mayflower Hotel to try to find somebody to help.
Yeah.
And he and Bob then reached out to the hospitals to try to find somebody. So yes, going to meetings is a wonderful place to find people who need help, but it's much bigger and broader than that. It's our reaching out. But you're right, and doing it because we want to share it, but also our very life is at stake. Yeah,
Precisely. Yeah.
And that's wonderful. Thanks so much, Carlos.
My pleasure.
Yeah, Ashley.
Herb, these questions that you have on your workbook, what is acceptance? Am I accepting of others in my life? Do I accept others as they are? Do I categorize people in each group based on my experiences? And then, am I inclusive with others? Am I truly open-minded, even when people disappoint me? Do I offer to include others in my activities? And then again, consider if I set others on a pedestal. Do I have diminished feelings about myself when I do so? Am I setting them apart from myself based on their accomplishments or position? And then you say, if I were in their shoes, how would I want to be treated? And it's so funny how quickly I forget, because when did we do tradition 3? Just 3 months ago?
Yeah.
And this is something I struggle with. I'll just be honest. My mind does categorize, like, where do I fit? Where do others fit? How do I find the right people? Am I the right person for that? And I'm having some humility. And it's really, do I categorize not only people, but it's really myself. So I don't know. It's just a comment. What is the primary principle under this tradition?
Well, my word would be inclusive.
Inclusivity. Okay. Yeah, I guess there's something with that, like terminal uniqueness, outsider, that brings me into the room, brings I think a lot of, people into the rooms. And this struggle with the right sizeness, I don't have anything else really to say.
I think that, number one, you reminded me, and I want to remind everybody that this is a workshop where you're expected to do some work, and the assignments that you were referring to were the sort of the grassroots of doing some research, doing some reading, doing some thinking, doing some writing, so that in fact you have some experience with each of these steps through this process. But the one word that I'll come back to, inclusive, it's kind of like an empty word, for me at least, but the word welcome seems to really have a sort of a warmth to it and a attraction to it. If I can have that attitude of welcome, I'm just going to my meeting, and I've been going to my home group for 38 years. And I go there like a robot sometimes, routinely. And right now I'm trying to actually consciously cultivate this heart space. That's new for me, of welcome. And it's come out of this reminder of the work that we're doing here.
So my question, I guess, to you is like, I feel like I can welcome others, but sometimes I have a hard time feeling welcome myself.
Oh, well, that's a different problem, isn't it?
So, yeah, I mean,
no, that's a pandemic problem for anybody that I've ever encountered a good conversation with in a 12-step, any 12-step program, is they don't feel they fit in, even in the rooms. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It's pandemic, though.
yeah.
It's not just, well, you know that. It's not just you.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah.
But my
Each one
question
of
is,
us.
have you ever throughout the years in your home group felt unwelcome?
Oh.
No.
Mm-mm. No.
Okay.
No, my home group is a very healthy home group.
Mm,
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Tradition 4, each group should be autonomous, the group, not just the meeting, but the group, except in matters affecting other groups or AA as a whole. That's the exception. Every group manages its affairs as it pleases, except when AA as a whole is threatened. Again, going back to the tradition 1, maybe, there we go, we're back all hooked up. The group, like the individual, must eventually conform to principles that guarantee survival. Going back to what Carlos was saying, this is about individual survival and, of course, the group survival. Again, going back to tradition 1, if the group doesn't survive, the individual won't. The individual is really important, but the individual isn't as important as the group, and there's the balance. 2 storm signals. A group ought not do anything which injure AA as a whole, nor affiliate itself with outside interests. That's the key here. An example, the AA Center, that didn't work. AA Center is a nomenclature that you don't use. AA doesn't have a center. You can have a Lano club, or you can have a meeting place wherever it, anyway. So the comments that I have on my worksheet, Bill uses the term, we're children of chaos in tradition 4. I love that term, children of chaos. Well, that was my family. I didn't know it, but I was the patriarch, not in contrast to anything, just I was the father, and my wife, an equal partner. Literally, she really was. And she was the matriarch. But we, both alcoholics, created lots of chaos, children literally of chaos, and they're still dealing with it 40 years later. No affiliation, autonomy is the key here. Interdependence, partnership, and somebody already mentioned this, the right to be wrong. And I have the term courtesy here. Courtesy, respect for another person. The respect and courtesy offered to somebody that it's okay, by my perception, it's okay for them to be wrong. And going back to what Roger was saying, that group conscience, and it probably is better that the word informed isn't used because that's a judgmental term. It's better to be informed, but to allow people to come into a discussion with their information as they have it and their feelings as they have them, so that in fact we can all learn from all of that. Any comments or questions, concerns about tradition 4? I'll move on if in fact there aren't, or you can, if there's something that does come to you, you're welcome to bring it. Tradition 5, each group has but one primary purpose. Oh, this is such an important tradition. The group itself has a purpose, a primary purpose, to carry its message. What's the message? To the alcoholic, to the addict, to the member who still suffers. Now, that doesn't mean newcomer. Listen to it. To the alcoholic who still suffers, to the participant member who still suffers. That could be somebody with 10 and 20 or 30 or 40 years because life's in session and they're suffering from some aspect of it. That's the purpose of the group. What's the message? I'm going to keep that as an open question. Perhaps you have some thoughts about what is the message of the group? What is the message of the meeting? Better do one thing well than many badly. The life of our fellowship depends on this principle. The ability of each AA to identify himself with and bring recovery to the newcomer is a gift from God. Now, I made a distinction between the newcomer and the long-timer. I'm broadening it. Passing on this gift to others is our one aim. Sobriety can't be kept unless it is given away. And I'm not necessarily talking about sobriety. I'm talking about unmanageability there, that second half of the first step, which causes, I believe, more chaos in the AA meetings than addiction itself. Singleness of purpose. Stay focused. What's the message? Anybody have any thoughts about what the message is of the group? Or even step 12. We carry this message. What's the message?
I just wanted to quickly go back to 4. I love the question and I needed it. Do I take myself and my ideas and what I want others to see me as too damn seriously? Yes. And I really appreciate that from tradition 4. I just wanted to say. And what is, well, to love thy neighbor as God loves me.
Well, that's a nice message, but is that the message of the 12th step? Is that the message they're referring to here?
You can have a relationship with power.
I mean, that's a nice message, but is that what it's meant? I obviously have an opinion.
Okay, well, I'm trying to, I guess, start a dialogue.
Yeah.
Of the practice these principles in all our affairs. I know this, I know your answer, and I don't.
Well, what is my answer? Well, what is my answer?
No, I mean, it's somewhere in this brain from years of
I see.
listening to you, but it's not coming.
Well,
to
let's take a look again. Well, there's lots of
There's
hands.
other people coming up, so I'm going to pass the torch.
Lots of hands. Let's go on and see what Lisa has to say, please.
So I feel like I'm hazarding a guess here.
Yeah, sure,
to
of course.
suggest.
It's not a trick question, and it's not meant to put anybody on the spot, but it is meant to put spotlight on what at least my thoughts are about it. Go ahead, Lisa.
Well, no, it's absolutely a good question, but it's a hazarded guess at the message. The primary purpose is to carry this message, and the message is that if you're finding your life unmanageable, that there is a way to live that will be more effective.
Yeah, it's part of
And that way is by practicing these steps.
Mm-hmm.
And then that can offer the opportunity for transformation in life. And I should probably just stop there.
Yeah. Let's just check in with Karen and see what her thoughts are.
Hi, Karen, alcoholic.
Hi.
Thanks again, Herb, for doing this. It's been a wonderful refresher. I think the key word to me in that tradition is its message. So it's talking
Yes.
about the group.
Yes.
And I know from my own experience, the different meetings that I go to, there's a different vibe in each meeting.
All
And
right.
that's kind of the message. I go to a meeting that's really kind of designed for newcomers. There's a different message in that meeting than there is for
Yes.
the one that I go to on Saturday morning, where we all have like 25 plus years of sobriety. So I
Yeah.
think it's unique to the group.
Yeah. I
Hopefully it's recovery related.
Well, exactly. Hopefully it's recovery related from whatever the particular issue is for that particular 12-step fellowship. And I wholeheartedly agree that each group, each meeting actually has its own culture. And from week to week, each meeting has a different message sometimes because there's a different focus. I agree. Yes, that's wonderful. Yeah. Mhm. Thanks, Karen. Carlos, again, please.
Love your work, Herb. I didn't say that the first time. I'm going to say it now, especially the 12-step work. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So I think I would characterize the message in two ways. There's a small M message. That is, you can be sober, you can be clean, you can not overeat, you can be emotionally sobriety, whatever the 12-step process group is.
Yep,
That's the small message.
There is a
And
solution, right?
And that's our strength, hope, and experience. The large M, the large message should be that, the promise of the steps. If you work the steps, your unmanageability can move you from self to small O others to big O others.
Mhm.
That's the large message. And through that process, you will become a better human being and you'll lose your unmanageability.
Yes, yes. And I agree 100% with that long description and definition. What would be the couple words that would summarize what you just said?
Help.
Well, actually, it's in the
recovery.
step itself. It's in the step itself. All right. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message. Oh, the message is that a spiritual awakening is available as the result of these steps. Now, it's exactly what you said.
Yes.
But I like to really highlight it for us. Bill puts it right in our face.
Yep.
The message is that you can have a spiritual awakening. Yes, that's the solution. And yes, that's a relationship with God or power. And yes, that's a change in the way you think and feel and behave. But yes, all of that. But wow, the message of the 12th step is a spiritual awakening. And the message, and Karen flavored it. Each group, each meeting, and maybe week to week is going to have a connotation of approach to a spiritual awakening. Yeah.
Well, but the deficiency I find in the rooms, as you know, you've been doing it. I've been doing it 30 years, but
yeah.
What I find in the rooms is that the focus is on that small M message. Look, when I'm in an NA room, these people could die when they walk out by shooting fentanyl. So the small M message is critical. It's critical they not do the, but the message is not. It's like they really believe they can have a spiritual awakening by osmosis. If I just go to enough meetings, I'll have a spiritual awakening. Now they may, but that's not what's promised.
As the result of these steps.
Yes, right. Yeah, that's the promise, right?
Yeah, no, you're right. And there's lots of small messages, small M messages. And not the least of which is you don't have to suffer anymore. You do not have to suffer from your addiction, and you do not have to suffer from your unmanageability. Yes, 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 yes. But you're right. And the large message, the capital M message, is that we can have a spiritual awakening, or if we wanted to say it in terms that maybe can be heard even more broadly, is that you used it, you can have a transformation.
Right.
Yeah. You can have a transformation. Yeah, it's probably actually almost a better word these days to catch people's attention, that you can have a personal transformation, and that might stimulate a conversation. Yeah, I like it a lot, actually. I'm glad you brought it up. Thanks, Carlos.
My pleasure.
Yeah, you want Lisa, please.
There we go, microphone. The other thought I had to this is maybe a little bit off to the side, but that you have to do the work, but you don't have to do it alone.
And you don't have to do it all by tomorrow.
Yeah.
No, that's really important. Yeah. You don't have to do it alone. Oh my God. In fact, I'll expand it. You can't do it by yourself.
It's like that first part that you have to do the steps, you have to do the work yourself. You have to do your own work, but you don't have to do this alone. You don't have to walk the path alone.
Yeah. That's a really good message for a lot of people who, in fact, really are aware that they need people. There are some people that don't feel that they need people. And so I would like to actually even turn the burner up on that statement that you made is you can't do it alone. Now, you could probably do steps 1 through 7 on your own, not as well, of course. But as you've heard me say, 8 and 9, I just don't believe anybody could do that effectively on their own. 8 and 9. I think we need some objectivity and we need some experience. Yeah. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks.
You bet. Tradition 6. An AA group ought never endorse, finance, or lend the AA name to any related facility or outside enterprise, lest problems of money, property, and prestige divert us from our primary purpose. The primary purpose, of course, is helping other people. Experience proved that we could not endorse any related enterprise, no matter how good it is. We could not be all things to all people. We saw that we could not lend the AA name to any outside activity. For good reason or not so good reason. These are the impediments. That's the weakness that I saw. The group weakness is the impediments, very much like character defects. And the terms that are used in the 12 and 12 is poverty of spirit, that humility, poverty of spirit, not attachment, certainly to property, power, and prestige, not attachment. That's what poverty means. It doesn't mean without food or without shelter. It doesn't mean monastic asceticism. Poverty just means detachment. We're not attached to. You can be a billionaire and have a spirit of poverty. Yeah. Because in fact, power, property, and prestige have a tendency to form attachment. You know what the Buddhists' 4 noble truths are, of course. Number 1, Buddhist principle, noble truth, number 1, life is suffering. Noble truth number 2, suffering comes from attachment. Noble truth number 3, suffering is dealt with by detachment. Notice the simple. Noble truth number 4, detachment comes from the implementation of the Eightfold Path, a process very, very similar to, in terms of its outcome, the 12-step process. Right thinking, right feeling, right work, etc., etc. I don't know all of the 8 principles. I have them listed. I've never memorized them. But the key here I wanted to emphasize is that the spirit of poverty is detachment, not having the use of money, property, and whatever else, but not being attached to it from an ego standpoint. It's not who I am. That's that emotional sobriety of not identifying with anything outside. Your opinion, your values, world values, but having my center of gravity deep inside myself. I'm not attached to circumstances. I'm not attached to events. I mean, to the best of our ability. Comments, questions, concerns about affiliation or endorsement? We'll pick it up there with tradition 7. Every AA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. This probably is maybe one of the more important discussions today to bring to our consciousness some type of inflation adjustment. There's lots of unrealistic thoughts about this. No AA tradition had the labor pains this one did. Collective poverty, initially a matter of necessity. Fear of exploitation, necessity of separating the spiritual from the material. Bill says the place that spirituality meets with money is in the basket, in the hat. Decision is to subsist on AA voluntary contributions only, placing the responsibility of supporting AA headquarters directly upon AA members. Bare running expenses plus a prudent reserve is headquarters policy. And it's been adjusted over time in terms of personal contributions. I think it's limited now to $3,000 a year, just to make sure that there's no golden rule. You know what the golden rule is as a interpretation in the context of this is the person with the gold rules. So in order not to have that kind of allegiance or connections, the corporate poverty, that detachment from money is really the key here. To stay away from the potential corruption of greed and materialism is really the point. Actual poverty, that's in contrast to the spirit of poverty that we talked about earlier, that detachment. And there's two things that I want to make comment on, and that's service for within the scope of the 12-step community is for fun and for free, to quote Chuck C, for fun and for free. However, as Bill pointed out, people who work within the structure should be paid appropriately, generously, actually competitively. Secretaries get, administrative people get, people who take care of Alano clubs get a proper, appropriate compensation. And the basket, one of the people we had speak at our traditions retreat some years ago, a very wise, experienced person, indicated that he inflation adjusts by putting into the basket today the current price of a drink. You see, in 1950, $1 might have been quite reasonable. Today, $1 is not actually reasonable at all. It's all connected to your own proportionality and your ability to afford, of course. But if you're putting into the basket the current price of a drink, that's inflation adjusted. It depends on where you drank and what you drank, of course. I mean, I'm staying with Alcoholics Anonymous for right now in terms of these comments. And there's no emphasis on money here, but I know my life depended on my finding this solution. My quality of life depends on my connection to the solution. Originally, my very life. Now, the quality of my life. Originally, I was dealing with my addiction. Now I'm dealing with my unmanageability, my spiritual malady, my human condition, my unmanageability. Thoughts about tradition 7? Questions about tradition 7? Concerns, experiences? it might be appropriate to bring it to the group conscience, to if in fact your group has a business committee or a steering committee, and if they don't, they probably would benefit from having one. Ashley, please.
Yeah, I guess an experience, I shared with this group an experience I went through with our group being fully self-supporting. And it was really interesting because it started off being a financial thing, but what we ended up finding out was that we needed more service positions, that we weren't fully self-supporting in service positions. And
You want to expand on that just a little bit, please?
Yes, well, I was actually taking on multiple.
What do you mean by service position?
Okay, service positions.
Don't assume that people understand the vocabulary.
Oh, okay. Yes. So people who are the secretary, the treasurer, the literature person for the meeting. So the different
the different functions that support the actual meeting. Yeah.
Yes. And
coffee maker, set up, tear down.
Correct. Yes.
Sometimes parking direction.
Yes.
Larger meetings, right? Yes.
And what came about in this new, online era was that we needed more service positions because what had started off being a temporary thing in this shutdown period that we had a few years ago ended up being something that stayed. And so one person couldn't take on. So we ultimately realized that there were more new positions that needed to be created so that the group could be fully self-supporting. Because if one person's doing more than their fair share, it's not fair to the group or to that person. It results in this problem of dominance. And
well, it also enables the newer people and or the other people to be quite lazy in terms of making contribution to the group through their own connection to and service for the group. Yeah.
Correct. And I guess along that line, there isn't a better return on your investment. For me, there hasn't been a better return on my investment than doing service in a group, because it teaches me about real life situations and I get to kind of practice these in the group. And then I am so much more equipped to handle delicate financial conversations in this service position I was doing as treasurer, or handling the finances and budgets and stuff. It was really interesting how much it paralleled the return on investment I got in my own life. And I can remember when I walked into the room, my first sponsor said, you need to get 2 service positions right away, else, if you want to work with me. And on the days that I was having trouble getting out of bed, that got me out of bed, and it made me feel like I had a purpose in life.
Yeah. My own sponsor said, I want you to go to a meeting every day. I was Brennan, and I want you to go 10 minutes early and stay 10 minutes after. He said, don't take any service commitments because you're just new. I'm balancing out your comments for really new people, but see where you can help out. Now, he didn't tell me that would make me feel a part of the community, but that's what happened. When I went early and asked how could I help, I got little assignments, not official and not prolonged. And if I stayed afterwards, I was able to talk to a few people or take some tables, and I became part of the community just by practice. I didn't know that's what I was doing. It wasn't my intention, but it was the outcome. So yeah, I wonderfully agree with you there. Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing that I was just writing this, and it's come up before when I've written it, is feeling a part of or apart from. And this a part of, a and part are 2 separate words. And I kind of maintain my autonomy, and I'm actually a part of when I maintain my autonomy. When it's all meshed together, a part, it's it's apart from, and I'm actually not able to really have my own identity. So having service is this really beautiful way of celebrating, my self-worth and my self-esteem. Oh, self-esteem.
Yeah.
Builds esteem by doing these acts. So thanks.
And connecting, you and I were talking about earlier, the pandemic of not fitting in, and that works for meetings too. I would have had that develop in me because that's who I am. I don't fit in. I wouldn't have fit into AA except that I took some actions, and Bob was talking about earlier about the feet versus the head. I was taking some actions, which I didn't even know the benefit of, but my sponsor did because he was a wise and experienced person. And I took the actions and I began to fit in, not because I intended to or wanted to, but just because my feet were moving me in that direction.
Yes.
Yeah, that's good. That's actually a nice insight. Thanks very much, Ashley. All right, number 8. Alcoholics Anonymous should remain forever non-professional, but our service centers may employ special workers. Well, I've talked a little bit about that in terms of fee versus voluntary. And what Ashley was talking about was voluntary commitments to support the meeting. What I was talking about earlier than that was paid positions like the secretary and the author. Bill was paid to write the big book, for instance, and the other literature that he did, in fact, author. You can't mix the 12th step and money. Big problem for therapists, etc., who are in a 12-step program, who many times I hear them saying, well, I serve people all day long, so I don't need to have sponsees. I don't need to be of service. And they got it wrong, 100%. If you're paid for something, it's not a service in the sense of 12-step. If you're paid for it, that's your career or your vocation. If in fact you're doing it for fun and for free, even if it's not for fun, but you're doing it for free, I mean, that's the service concept in the 12th step, and there's no money involved. Line of cleavage between voluntary step, 12-step work, and paid for services, what I'm mentioning. AA could not function without full-time service workers. I think General Service Office has maybe 100, 120 paid employees. Of course, they're functioning in terms of worldwide international organization. Professional workers are not professional AAs. That's the point. Relation of AA to industry, education, 12-step work is never paid for, but those who labor in service for us are worthy of their hire. Yeah. And so it's about money. Straightforward. It's about money. The service work implied by the 12th step is free. No money intended. Non-professional service, justice for employment, and in terms of the voluntary, part of it, gratitude. I'm so grateful for the program of AA that I want to support it with my time. Any questions, concerns, comments about that? Let's go to number 9. AA as such ought never be organized, but we may create service boards or committees directly responsible to those they serve. And we've got a ton of that in the organizational structure, and we'll see the real genius of it when we get to the concepts. Special service boards and committees, the General Service Conference, the Board of Trustees, the group committees cannot issue directives to AA members or groups. We are very organized, by the way. Any implication that AA is disorganized is just absolutely ignorant. Now, people are disorganized, but I've never seen a better organizational structure and the people within it than AA itself. Absence of coercion works because unless each AA follows suggested steps to recovery, he signs his own death warrant. That's the ultimate, isn't that? Isn't that the ultimate, what Carlos was talking about way earlier in terms of it's life and death? People say, I don't have time. Really? You don't have time to support your own life? I don't have time for meditation. I don't have time to go to meetings. Meetings aren't the program, but they are certainly part of the support system for the program. I went to a meeting every day for over 10 years because my sponsor asked me to, and then I began to like it. I don't go to a meeting every day now. I go to one meeting a week. I'm connected to alcoholics every day. I'm connected with people seeking a spiritual awakening every day. But I go to a meeting once a week in order to stay connected to my community. A physical meeting now. My home group has opened up a physical meeting some months ago. Same condition applies to the group. Suffering and love are AA's disciplinarians. But Bill mentioned it in terms of the traditions. There's only two disciplines. One is God, and one is alcohol. You're either going for one or you're going for the other. I just love the simplicity of that and the consequences of that. Black and white. You're either going for the light or you're going for the darkness. That dimmer switch, going up a notch at a time or going down a notch at a time. On a greased axle I add that to it to give it the power. I keep my shoulder leaning into the dimmer switch so that it doesn't go backwards and it does go forward. Gently. Difference between spirit of authority and spirit of service. Aim of our service is to bring sobriety within the reach of all who want it. My chronic question is, how can I be more effective? How can I be more effective? Not to promote me. I'm not one bit interested in that, but to make the message more effective, to get people connected to it. It's about power. This is where the concept of servant leadership comes in and rotation. When I first came to my home group, they'd had a secretary for 12 years. Same secretary. And I began, after I did the steps, to begin to take a look at the traditions and as I mentioned, I engaged a tradition guy to bring me through the traditions because that person had experience with it. And I learned about rotation. I brought it back to the home group, the little committee that basically steered the home group. And eventually they saw the wisdom of rotation. It didn't create any real controversy. I mean, a little ripple in the wet water for a while. People don't like change. And yet once they are convinced that change is helpful and healthy, they'll sign on to it. And that's really the key. The two words that are my favorite words in the big book are basically flip sides of the same coin, useful and helpful. How can I be useful? How can I be helpful? Those are the lenses through which I try to look. Is this helpful? Is this useful? Comments, concerns, questions, experiences?
I just wanted to read, I was just looking at the definition of organization, organize, and to provide with an organic structure. I just thought that was so particularly, when you talked about, so particularly relevant here, because I do feel the way that everything came about was not really forced. It really was organic. And
there's a flow to it, yes.
It was a flow, and that's why it's unlike really any other structure that I'm aware of,
Yeah.
And the other thing is organ, the body. I just also thought about how, the malady starts with our addiction in the body. And then I just kind of thought about that, the organ as being the malady in the group, with this organization, and how, because of the way that communication was so readily available between these members, that people had the wherewithal to speak up and have multiple opinions in one place. And then it just kind of evolved. It's just really such a beautiful thing, how it really organically came about.
Well, and I'm connecting that to my opening comments also about the image I have is that it's like the corpus, the body of AA worldwide, internationally, is kind of like this cosmic entity that's like analogous, like my body is integrated. I have arms and legs and eyes and ears, and they all function to support my system. It's the same with organization and this organism of AA. And that's the point of the God principle, is that that's the animating force. That's the animating force of the organism, of the cosmic organism.
What is the animating force?
God, the spirit.
Oh, God. Yes.
The spirit. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. It's actually quite a mystical, poetic concept if you step way back and embrace this analogy, this model that I'm using. There's a Latin word for it called mystici corporis, called a mystical body. It's a concept from the mystics that look at the oneness, the unity of all reality. I read about it. Carlos, please.
One of the insights, Herb, that you awakened me to in your 12-step study that you just were talking about, I don't want to go too far off field, is
that's fine.
So there's the dimmer switch and the spiritual awakening, the spiritual experiences.
Yep.
I always understood that, but I never had the epiphany that you gave me, simply that we don't do the moving up on the dimmer switch. We do not make that light brighter. That's a gift of the spirit and a matter of grace.
Yeah.
Now, we have to do the footwork. We have to meet with our sponsors. We have to do our step work. We have to be willing. We have to implement our meditation and our contemplation, all those things. But we're not the ones that are moving that light brighter, right? We don't have that power. We're not God.
That's the humility right there. The humility is there are preconditions that I need to do, but even my ability to do the preconditions is a grace.
Yeah, step 10, the step 10 work, yeah.
Well, whatever the work is, my willingness is the cornerstone, Bill says, and yet I know that my willingness is a grace that preceded my willingness. Now, there's a mystery, you've heard me say it, there's a mystery there between willingness and my action, a willingness and grace. I can't explain why I'm willing, why you're willing, and you know plenty of people who thought they were willing and they're dead.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's,
but for the grace of God, go on.
well, there, and that's the humility. That's the expression of, okay, and Bill says it, of myself, I am nothing. Without you, all right, I am lost. I mean, it's a pretty dramatic statement. I think it's on page 14 someplace in his story. But without you, I am lost. I'm ineffective. I cannot do this. I may want to, I may know how, but I cannot do this on my own. And that keeps me sort of right-sized. That's the whole point of humility. Appreciate that, Carlos. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Number 10, Alcoholics Anonymous has no opinion on outside issues. Hence, the AA name ought never to be drawn into public controversy, never more relevant than in today's culture, where there's so much drama, so much opinion, so many propaganda from both sides of every issue. AA does not take sides in any public controversy. AA itself, I mean, the individuals, of course, can have whatever opinion they want and express them in conversation, but not within the rooms and not as a member of. Reluctance to fight is not a special virtue. Survival and spread of AA are primary aims. Survival and the spread of the message. Lessons learned from the Washingtonian movement. In 4 years, they had 400,000 people. In 4 years, AA had less than 100 people. Think about that. The Washingtonians in the 1800s, with no means of communication, radio or telegraph, they had 400,000 people in 4 years. 100 years later, AA, with all of the modern, most of the modern communication devices, had only less than 100. 1939, when the book was published, there was less than 100. Bill rounded it up just because he liked round numbers, but there weren't 100 people. And the Washingtonians were dead, so dead that Bill hadn't even heard of them. And they were a successful recovery program for alcoholics. But they got distracted because they didn't have the traditions. That was the motivating force for Bill to develop these traditions. He didn't want AA to die that way. Opinions and the promotion of personalities rather than principles. We can disagree, but as you've heard him say, we disagree agreeably. So that we can have a clean, I wrote down, so that we can have a clean message. I don't wear buttons. I don't wear a hat with a slogan or a symbol. I don't have bumper stickers. I don't want anything to potentially interfere with somebody approaching me to get help. I think even, for instance, in a meeting saying, I'm a recovering Catholic, I hear that. I think that's obnoxious, actually. It doesn't belong there. It signals something, some type of an affiliation or lack of affiliation, or prejudice. What allows us to be attractive and our message to be attractive to the maximum number of people? I'm actually careful about the use of the term God or spirituality. I try to use alternative words in public so that it's not, people are not resisting. I use the word relationship rather than spirituality. I use the word force or source or power rather than God or even higher power. Not because I'm embarrassed or uncomfortable, I'm not one bit, but I want to be maximally effective in attracting people to ask questions. Comments, questions, concerns, tradition 10 about affiliation again. Tradition 11, our public relations policy. Keep in mind, these are tricky now. We're going to be talking about anonymity. There's two variations on this approach. Tradition 11 and tradition 12, both about anonymity. Tradition 11, our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. Doesn't mean we don't advertise, because we do. AA does advertise. We need to always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, films, and TV. Personal anonymity at the public level. What does that mean about my name? No, I can use my name. Herb. When I wrote my books, I asked General Service Office and some trustees. I had several discussions. Should I just not put any name there? Should I put my full name? Should I put my first name and my last initial, just my first name? And they were very clear. Use your first name and your last initial. People need to know how to find you. But you don't identify as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the key. I can go to Congress and indicate that I'm in a 12-step program, but I'm not a member of, quote, AA. And of course, they discourage photographs and or the first name in a publication. Of course, that's the whole point of it. It's not about raising the visibility of an individual. It's about raising the visibility of an organization. So as a member of, I need to be anonymous, but I can go to the PTA and tell them I'm a member of a 12-step program. I could even say I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, as long as there wasn't a reporter there that was going to print my name and or my picture as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. There's a bit of a controversy, as some of you know, and we had that conversation when we did the traditions 11 and 12. The New York culture coming from Bill Wilson was first name only, last initial fine. And the culture of Akron, where Bob was just the opposite. It's an open controversy. It's in the AA literature. Dr. Bob's attitude was, if you didn't use your first and last name in the rooms of AA, you were violating the tradition, because how would people find you? And the conclusion in both of the cultures and all of the literature is you determine how anonymous you want to be and in what form. I know people who only use their first name. Some people use their first name and last initial. Some people use their full name. Everybody's entitled to make their own mind up as to how anonymous you want to be. The point is that humility that we've talked about and stressed this entire conversation. Public relations are important to AA. Good public relations save lives. We seek publicity for AA principles, not AA members. The press has cooperated. Personal anonymity at the public level is the cornerstone of our public relations policy. 11th tradition is a constant reminder that personal ambition has no place in AA. Each member becomes an active guardian of our fellowship from that standpoint. Roger, please.
Thanks, Herb. I just wanted to point out, in my experience, GSO has a lot of material available that helps in this area. For example, we started a meeting at a local hospital a few years ago through their mental health department with an opportunity to try and approach people who may be at a particularly low point in their lives with a message of hope. But as a result of that, became a lot of other opportunities in cooperation with the professional community and the PICPC through the district, where you're out reaching and delivering messages, maybe at high schools or service clubs and things like that. But all the materials that GSO have, they include things like templates of letters to the professional communities, to doctors. They include downloadable videos, downloadable PowerPoint presentations.
Wow.
All of it help with any potential problems in relation to this area.
Yeah. The website is particularly robust, and I'm glad to hear you're talking about other resources. So they've been quite helpful in that area. There was something else I was going to mention. Slipped my mind right now. All right. Anything else, Roger?
No.
Thank you so much. And tradition 12, anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities. We mouth it so easily. We remember it so easily. We hear it so easily. But really think about it. Principles before personalities. What are we talking about? Principles. That's how I started off talking about. The universal truths is what we're talking about. The law of gravity is a law of physics. It doesn't change. Immutable, non-negotiable. What we're talking about here are human principles, universal principles, spiritual principles, cosmic principles, whatever it is you want to talk about. These are the principles that we attempt to find and discover and be in alignment with, that flow that Ashley was talking about. Guidelines and guardrails. These principles are what allows us to get into the flow of life and to go along. I don't mean go along to get along. I do mean to be in the flow of life. Spiritual substance of anonymity is sacrifice. That comes from the Latin. And it doesn't mean killing the lamb and spilling the blood, although it took on that connotation. But it comes from two Latin words, sacer, meaning holy priest, and facere, meaning to make. Sacer, facere, sacrifice. This is an effort to make whole, W-H-O-L-E. Subordinating personal aims to the common good is the essence of all 12 traditions. Sacrificing personal reputation, personal visibility, personal attachment to power, prestige, money, property. Why AA could not remain a secret society. Principles come before personalities. 100% anonymity at the public level. That was tradition 11. Anonymity is real humility. This is tradition 12. A spiritual principle of anonymity, the principle of humility. And I think it was Ashley that mentioned the grain of sand on the beach. Just one of many. That one is I'm the center of my universe. I'm not the center of AA. I'm not the center of the universe. I hold on to my autonomy as an independent person, and I foster that. And yet I'm connected to the community as an integral part of my survival, safety, and ability to then influence and connect to other people in terms of the awakening that is the promise of the 12th step. I'm not sure it was St. Francis or Augustine. I think it's been alleged to both of them. It said, wherever you are in the world, preach the good news. Well, good news is a translation of the word gospel. And in the context of St. Francis and Augustine, it's from the Catholic tradition. St. Francis being a saint from the 12th century, Augustine being a saint from the 4th century. But whoever said it, it doesn't matter, because the way it ends, it's so relevant to us. Wherever you are in the world, preach the good news if you have to use words. That's the anonymity we're talking about. Be the model of a spiritual awakening. So much so that the light that you have in you shines through you onto the path that you're walking, so other people can walk that path in the light of your experience to have their own experience. That's where steps 12 and tradition 12 merge. I'm a lantern. That's my goal. That's my vision. I want to be a lantern, meaning, like Carlos was indicating, that meditation, that consciousness that we bring in the light, we improve the light in us so that the light shines in us, through us, onto the path to others. I'm a lantern on the path, shining the light of my experience on the path that I've walked so that others can walk that path in safety and security and have their own experience. so that they too can become lanterns, to light the path. This is multi-level marketing at its best. No, seriously. If I touch one and that one touches two and those two touch four and the geometric impact of that. And we have to challenge ourselves. Why is AA still around 2 or 3 million people in the United States or in the world? I'm not even sure what the number is, and nobody really knows. But there's not been much growth since 2000. Something's amiss. That's why I think there's a renaissance happening. Your participation in this is an indication of that. The people who participate in the STEP workshops and or the STEP process out of the big book are a signal that there is a renaissance. I think that's a healthy sign in the last 40 to 50 years. Karen, please.
I just have a question, Herb. I don't really have much experience with Al-Anon, but I know our tradition says principles before personalities, and their tradition says principles above personalities. And I just wondered what, I know it's got to be significant, but I don't know what it is.
I'm assuming it is, and there might be an Al-Anon on the call that could respond to that. I'm not, and I can't. So yeah, but I am aware of that difference. I brought it up a couple of times. I've not had any response that at least satisfied me. Yeah, so I know there is a difference. It can be an outstanding question right now. Yeah. But there is a word that, or a phrase that Bill uses in the 12 and 12 that I wanted to just conclude and bring to your attention, and that is that anonymity is the protective mantle of Alcoholics Anonymous. Anonymity is the protective mantle of a 12-step program. I like the image of that. We cloak ourselves in anonymity, well, to the extent that it's relevant and in the spirit of things. Obviously, I'm not very anonymous with my workshops and my books and my constant contact and etc. But in the spirit of it, I'm not trying to promote Herb, I'm trying to promote an awakening, and that there is a process, there is a solution. I was a seeker for so long, even 4 years in AA, and you've heard me share that. I was a seeker, proud of being a seeker. Oh my, that was a badge of, until I became a finder, 1988, because I did this work and I had the awakening and it changed my life, radical. Yeah. Ashley, please.
Yeah, Herb, I just had a question based on that cloak of anonymity. I struggle when people say so-and-so is my sponsor and a lead, or so-and-so is my sponsee.
It's inappropriate. It's inappropriate.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
My sponsees do not know who I sponsor, unless in fact they find out from whoever is sharing in a meeting and or in a conversation at coffee. My wife didn't know who I sponsored. My wife didn't know who I met with.
Yeah, that's how I was. That's what the first few people that I, started learning about program from and that I was drawn to.
Yeah.
We were very protective of that. And I just noticed that sometimes in certain meetings, there's a culture in that meeting of letting everyone know who's what, and it makes me feel really enmeshed. So it's hard.
Yes. I have lots of opinions about all of that, but I agree. The real challenge is an answer to the question, what does anonymity mean? And that's an individual interpretation. Yeah. All right. Are there any questions, concerns, experiences, or comments that anybody would like to make before we bring ourselves to a conclusion? I think that was an effective approach to this wrap up. I feel comfortable with it, and we'll continue to do this protocol for the next 6 months as we walk into the concepts, a little more esoteric from some people's standpoint. I believe every bit as necessary to at least have a working knowledge of it. So I hope that you will join us. We talk about the 12 steps, practicing principles, obviously living our personal life. It's the antidote to unmanageability. That's the best kept secret in the rooms. Unmanageability is the spiritual malady. Bill suggests we're not cured. He doesn't actually use the term, we're not cured of unmanageability. We're not cured of our human malady. We're not cured of our bedevilments. He doesn't use any of that, but those are the connections I make. Unmanageability is what we're not cured of. That's our human condition, not our addict. Only a percentage of humans are addicts. But unmanageability is, I believe, the human condition. That's why Bill, in his preface to the first edition, said, our way of living may have its advantages for all. These principles of the first 9 steps geared to helping people recover from their addiction. But the last 3 steps are critical for us to recover from our unmanageability and to be empowered. We're not powerless. We have free will, but it gets hijacked by instincts gone awry. These 12 traditions help us practice principles for living in our social community. The 12 steps in our personal life, the traditions can be in our social life, meaning the connection with another person. I don't mean society at large, but I meant in our intimate, significant relationship and or our family, and or translate that into your every aspect of your personal life connected to another human being. So how are these concepts going to apply to us? Certainly in the intent they have in the organizational and the structure and the service structure of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12-step fellowships, the variety of them. They may have all adopted the concept. I'm not actually sure of that. I know Al-Anon has. But what are those 12 principles, and literally within the context of the organization? And how can we then bring them into our personal life? And we'll be talking about all of that. Please join me in this adaptation of the St. Francis prayer. That's why I took his name off of it. It's an adaptation for our current consciousness and our current life, practicing principles for alignment. Spirit of the universe, make me a channel of your peace. That where there is hatred, I may bring love. That where there is wrong, I may bring the spirit of forgiveness. That where there is discord, I may bring harmony. That where there is error, I may bring truth. That where there is doubt, I may bring faith. That where there is despair, I may bring hope. That where there are shadows, I may bring light. That where there is sadness, I may bring joy. Grant that I may seek rather to comfort than to be comforted, to understand than to be understood, to love than to be loved. For it is by self-forgetting that one finds it is by forgiving, that one is forgiven. It is by dying that one awakens to this life. That's the major change in this prayer. Not for after this life, it's for this life. These principles for today help me awaken and be in the flow and flourish. Amen. Thanks, everybody.